A.K. Blakemore is a gift to the genre of historical fiction. Before she was a novelist, she was a poet. And you can tell, you can see that in every single word, every page that she writes, there is poetry. Her novel, The Manningtree Witches, is one of my favourite pieces of historical fiction of all time. An incredible novel set in the English 1600s about family and community, and it is absolutely beautiful. And now we have The Glutton, her second novel. Another piece of historical fiction, and quite possibly my favourite English language novel of 2023. The story of The Glutton is based on a real person, a Frenchman named Tarrare. Tarrare was born somewhere near Lyon, around the year 1772. He was a soldier, and he was kind of infamous or famous in France for being able to eat anything. He was a scrawny, withered man who died in his 20s, and until that point he became known for his insatiable appetite and the strange things he would eat. He never gained any weight, he was always hungry, and he would eat just about anything. He reportedly ate live animals, household objects, and maybe even a human baby. And A.K. Blakemore's second novel is the novelization of that life, the life of Tarrare, the glutton, the bottomless man. This novel is pretty much everything I wanted from a second A.K. Blakemore novel and more. I'm a huge fan of historical fiction, especially if it has a slightly gothic bent, and it increasingly seems like whether or not the novel was written by a French person, I really love historical fiction that is set in France. One of my favourite novels of all time is Little by Edward Carey, a novelization of the life of the woman who would grow up to become Madame Tussaud. And The Glutton has echoes of that. Partly because it's a novelization of the life of a real person, an historical figure, a kind of legend, and it also happens to be set in France. But also because it has echoes of the Gothic. It is also a tragedy. It is a novel peppered with so much sorrow and discomfort. The Glutton has a framing device. Tarrare is sick in hospital. It's after the French Revolution, and he's been sent to this hospital and he's in the care of these nuns who are nursing him while he probably dies. And he gets chatting with one of these nuns, a kind of naive young woman who is interested in his story, thinks that he is some kind of abomination, but has enough intrigue in his life to sit and listen to his story. But here I would like to address my only criticism with this novel, which is the framing device is not consistent. Occasionally we jump back into this time when Tarrare is in the hospital bed, telling his story to this nun, but as the novel goes on, the framing device kind of falls away and the rules of narrative storytelling get broken, and not, as far as I can tell, in any intentional way. Breaking the rules with purpose is great and I love to see it, but here the rules kind of get broken haphazardly, where the framing device no longer continues on and makes sense and abides by the rules that it set out to follow. But I can't really talk about specifics without spoiling things. That is my one criticism with the book. It's pretty minor in the grand scheme, and it might even be the case that I missed something. But I'm getting that out the way so I can focus on why this is such a phenomenal piece of fiction. Once we have that framing device kind of sorted out, we flash back to the day that Tarrare was born. This chapter is focused on Tarrare's parents, who are teenagers, basically children. It's the late 18th century, we're in a small village in France. These two kids had sex and now she's knocked up, and Tarrare's father is an idiot. There is a festival going on where two different villages come together and celebrate a day. They have a feast, they all get drunk, and you know that fights are gonna break out. But Tarrare's father, who again is a teenager, brings a knife to this fight. His actions lead him to get hurt to the point that he dies of his injuries. He's beaten senseless, and then he starts just walking, half-conscious, bleeding from everywhere, towards the house where Tarrare's mother is giving birth. And he slowly sort of wanders over there, and one of the three women who is helping the birth comes outside, sees him and goes, "Oh my god, what did you do? The girl you knocked up is currently giving birth, you've gotten into a fight, and oh dear, it looks like you're dead." And he kind of tumbles down onto the ground in front of her. He's barely conscious, he's bleeding out. And it's really grim and sad, it's tragic, but it's also darkly hilarious because of how these women treat him. They're just disappointed and annoyed at the situation. They just tut and sigh and go, "Great, what do we do now? Kid's gone and got himself killed. Brilliant. Genius." And it's very, very funny. Tarrare's mother is a teenager giving birth, and she orders one of these women to go out, see if he's alive enough and conscious enough to just tell her what name he wants for this child. And he just sort of mumbles something. The woman comes back in and goes, "It sounded like he said Tarrare, which is a town." And Tarrare's mother goes, "Okay, great, my baby's called Tarrare. That's not really a name. People can't be named after places, but sure, okay, great, that's what he said, and now he's dead. Fine, okay. Tarrare." It's dark, it's hilarious, and it's beautifully, poetically written in a really dark and funny and bleak and tragic way. Because it's A.K. Blakemore, and everything she writes is poetry. It would be kind of bold of me to call her a modern-day Oscar Wilde in the way that she has this command over language, but I'm gonna do it. That's what she is. Then through the rest of part 1, we follow Tarrare's childhood. Her mother kind of shacks up with this philandering, horrible man who becomes Tarrare's surrogate father, stepfather, whatever, treats Tarrare like shit, and eventually part 1 ends with Tarrare leaving, being beaten senseless and leaving the village. Part 2 begins his life as the Glutton, the bottomless man. He joins up with this group of wandering performers, criminals, whatever they want to be. They wander, they make money as best they can while staying poor but kind of hedonistic and free. And he joins this group. And he soon discovers that he has this bottomless hunger. He cannot be filled. And so he does things like eat rats. He reportedly eats a live cat. He does a lot of horrible things for a little bit of money as a sideshow act. And the story goes on from there. This is the story of Tarrare's life, and it is one of tragedy, it is one of humour, it is one of found family to a point, and we just follow him as he goes. But what makes this novel so thought-provoking, so tantalizing, so thematically exciting, is the question of Tarrare's place in the world, because this is a book set in the lead up to and during the French Revolution. The French Revolution takes place during this novel. And what's so interesting about that is the French Revolution, at least in our collective consciousness, represents a peasant's revolt. Ordinary working people rising up and saying that the royal family, the lineage of kings and queens, none of these people were actually selected by a god. They have no divine right to rule. We should rule ourselves. It is collective revolution, and it's beautiful. Tarrare was born in squalor. He was beaten senseless. He was left in a forest to die. He has never known satisfaction when it comes to comfort, being fed properly, having a roof over his head. These things are luxuries that he doesn't quite understand. He is as poor as you can be. And yet, as the revolution takes place and takes hold, you realize that Tarrare is not really a part of it. He doesn't really understand it. There is a kind of foolishness and naivety to him as a character all the way through the book. Things happen to him. He doesn't have much agency. He doesn't do a lot. Things just are done to him. He doesn't go, "Hey, I can eat anything. I'll go out and become a circus performer." No, that just kind of happens to him. So as the revolution is going on, and people are making choices about what they want for the state of their country, and they are rising up, and they are revolting, and they are rioting, and they are taking a stand, he's in it, but he doesn't get it. And at the end of the novel, and I don't think this spoils anything just by offering you this kind of phrase, this idea comes into question amongst, again, the people around Tarrare and not Tarrare himself, where the question is raised, does Tarrare, or a person like him, actually have a place in this world? And it makes you think about the politics. You've got the kings and the queens. There is no longer a place for them. Historically, you've had the serfs, the peasants. There's not really been a place for them at least in terms of things like government and actually making choices and having free will. It's all about your lot in life and doing what you can with what you have. So okay, the kings and queens had agency, and now they don't. The peasants didn't have agency, and now they do. They're taking life and the nation into their own hands. And then there's this guy, the glutton, the bottomless man. This young man who does not have agency still. And it made me think about what exactly that question is and what it means. Who is Tarrare? What group does he represent? What kind of people remain lacking in purpose, lacking in agency, lacking in any kind of ability to be themselves and have free will? There is no place for people like Tarrare. What does that mean? And I found that so fascinating, and I'm still grappling with it. I don't really know what Blakemore is saying here, what exactly Tarrare represents. It makes you wonder if no matter what the political regime or political status quo, whether we're in a capitalist society, a socialist society, whatever it may be, maybe it's impossible to find a place for every kind of person. I personally don't like that level of cynicism. I am a socialist. I am part of a minority group that are currently being oppressed by my own government. I don't like the idea that there will always be some people who can never find a place. I do not like that. I do not agree with it. But I do appreciate Blakemore for forcing me to consider that question. If I say that I believe that every single kind of person, no matter their race, class, gender, sexuality, disability, whatever it may be, every kind of person has a place, I then have to prove that. And that's a challenge. And I like the fact that this novel has encouraged me to think that way. I think that's great. I don't have an answer. I'm not going to give you an answer now. It's a belief. It is a hope. I believe that every kind of person has a place in some kind of ideal, hopefully socialist society. It's fascinating to think about, and it really got me going. It really had the cogs turning. And given that knowledge about who Tarrare is, and his place in French society, both pre- and post-revolution, you come to realize that this is a real tragedy. It is a book that does not shy away from dark humour, as I've said, but it certainly is a tragic tale about one man and his journey. And through parts 1, 2, and 3, his life shifts and changes a lot. The country changes, his geography changes, his location changes, the people he is surrounded by change. We go from family to found family to something else in the third act. Tarrare shifts and changes a lot, and you wonder, okay, but how much does he grow as a person? And at no point does he really have any agency. He stumbles from place to place, from thing to thing, kind of like Forrest Gump. It's absolutely fascinating the way that Blakemore has written a character who is likable and interesting, but this is very much a story of things that happen to him rather than him making choices. And in that sense, he is a desperately tragic figure. The Glutton is an amazing novel, but I will say that the whole glutton aspect, the amount that he eats and what he eats, it is written with absolutely disgusting viscerality. It is really spine-chilling and toe-curling, but this is absolutely not a horror novel by any means. It's just grotesque in places. Having to say out loud that Tarrare eats a cat when cats are my favourite thing in the whole wide world is not easy. But again, this isn't horror, it's not terror, it's just gruesome sometimes. So I guess slight trigger warning for all of that stuff, but it's worth it, because this is a fantastic book. As time goes on, I fall deeper and deeper in love with historical fiction, and I read more and more of it. I have an article on our website, and it is the largest article we have, where I have listed over 70 historical novels that I have read and loved. Go read it, I'll link it in the description. I love historical fiction, and this is now absolutely one of my favourites. The Manningtree Witches remains a favourite of mine, and now The Glutton sits right alongside it. What an amazing piece of historical fiction. Go check it out, support me on Patreon if you can and you love what I do, and subscribe for books.